Okay, good evening, Ma. You're welcome to page 130. That's 130. That is a course that deals with social studies. Social studies. Okay, let me wait patiently for you to join so that we'll get started. Okay, I'll wait patiently for your arrival. Then we'll start something. Okay, so okay, you're welcome, Ma. I can see you are here. So let's get to work. Let's get to work. Mm, we stopped at this is PED 130. That's primary. I think social studies of the things, as a study on social studies. We stopped on Unit 2. That is historical background of social studies. That is the topic before us. And that's just taught me about the history and background of social studies. How did they start? Where did they start? By whom and how has it evolved? Now, the main concern we have in this particular course is to talk about development of social studies uh, or the thoughts, social study thoughts in the United States of America. We will talk about it in Britain, in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria. So I'm not sure we'll be able to finish all that in one class. But let's see how much we can do in a class. As a form of introduction, so we understand what we are actually here to do. I don't know if this is big enough, but if I take it a bit up, it's also going to be too, wow, this material is not balanced. Okay. Now, social studies as a discipline of study cannot be described as a casually conceived subject that just happened by accident. Rather, it is part of an inheritance and a tradition that requires citizens to function efficiently and effectively in a democratic society. In this unit, you will have an opportunity to read about the development of social studies both from global and national perspectives. This will involve a review of the discipline's historical development in different key nations, the circumstances leading to its development in such nations, and the interactive effect of such development on the growth of the discipline in other countries across continents. And we'll talk about social studies within the past 100 years can be said to have developed in different parts of the world relatively similar goal, but due to a series of events which have been peculiar to different nations sharing the interest. Social studies has come to be seen in different countries as a tool for national development. So some of the countries where the social studies thoughts have greatly developed and blossomed in the past years include the United States of America, Britain, and of course, Africa, with special reference to our country, Nigeria. So, where the introduction is creating a picture of what we are expecting in this course. That social study is a kind of inheritance. It's far more than just a study of social relations. It has an impact on the development of the nation. And over we have so many countries that have used the concept of social studies, and it has helped them to blossom and develop greatly. One of them is the United States of America, and we talk about their own thoughts. That means what they see about social studies and how they've used it to develop their nation. And of course, Nigeria, and we'll study a bit on African usage of social studies too, and particularly Nigeria. What are we expected to do at the end of this course, or sorry, this unit? What is the aim? What do we have in mind as we go through the unit? Well, by the end of this unit, we should be able to do the following. One, describe the origin of social studies in the United States of America. For now, you may not know what happened in United States, what was the origin of social study, how it happened. But when we finish reading, you should be able to say something. When they say what is the origin of social studies in the United States, maybe one woman gave birth to one child and the child, fainted, and you shall have a story to tell by the time we are done with this unit. The second one, you should be able to describe the origin of social studies in Britain. That's another country entirely. That is the British Empire, United Kingdom. Now, that is another thing. You will know the story behind it. How did they form or come about their own social study practices? And how has it impacted their country? And then we'll talk about the origin of social studies in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria. You just have the sufficient information to describe the origin in each of these nations. Now, let's go to the main content, and the first thing we will don't forget, the first focus is the United States of America, how it has used social studies, how social studies has impacted the development of that country. That is what we are concerned about. Now, the United States of America appeared to be the mother country of social studies. When we say mother, I think this is very important statement. This is something no one can use for question in exam. When we talk about mother, it means the country that gives birth, or that gave birth to the concept of social studies. So United States of America is one that gave birth to the concept of social studies. And no wonder Obebi in 1990 commented that social studies first appeared as a curriculum of the educational system of the United States of America, that is USA, within the first 2 decades of the 20th century. That means around maybe, maybe 1910 to 1920. Now, he further remarked that though it was a stormy and difficult birth, distinguished scholars like John Dewey, George Count, Elijah Wesley, Harold Rugg, and L. Rugg were the midwives. That means they were the one who solicited for, the development of the subject matter, social studies. When they say midwives, they were in charge of, you know, coordinating the birth. The birth actually, why the USA itself became the mother of social study, the midwives that, they coordinated or hosted the betting of that concept. Well, people like John Dewey, George Count, Edgar Wesley, Harold Rugg, and L. Rugg. Those are the midwives. Now, these are important points you need to, put in mind because of exams. So, before we started reading about United States, we probably don't know anything about social study in the United States. But now that we've opened, we've read, we found 2 points already. One is that United States can be regarded as the mother of social studies because it started here. They gave birth to social study. And who were the people that were in charge, the first people that fought for that concept. There were people like John Dewey, George Count, Edgar Wesley, and Harold Rogge and Earl Rogge. I think Harold and Earl, they are brothers or sisters. I don't know, but that their surname seems to be the same. Now, Thomas Jesse, who was the chairman of National Education Association Committee on Social Studies, which issued its final report as part of a major review of the reorganization of secondary education in 1917, has been identified as one of the first to use the term social studies in its present sense. We have gotten to another point in the development of social study in America. We said that says that social study in America started as far back as the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And when we say we are talking about 1900 till 2000. You understand? To 2000. The 21st century that we are in now started from 2000 and it's going to end in 2100. Now, a century is an 100 year. Oh, sorry, what am I saying? Yes, 100 years. So when he said that the first 2 decades is actually talking about is either 1910 to 1920. Now, we said that in 1917, there is this man who is the chairman of National Education Association Committee on Social Studies in the United States of America. His name was Thomas Jesse. He was the one that first, through the review of some of their curriculum and activity, made mention of the word social studies. And now that word became the generally accepted term for the studies of social relations. So now it's now the accepted term social studies. That was coined in 1917 by Thomas Jesse. So when you are teaching social studies in the class, something should ring in your mind. This is a word that came to being, that was given birth to by the United States of America, midwife by people like uh, Earl Rogge, Harold Rogge. The most important person and figure there is John Dewey, because when you start studying sociology deeply, you find out that John Dewey is someone that they practically mentioned a lot in that field. So it was midwifed by those people. And then the important thing you should always remember when you're teaching social studies is that there is a man called Thomas Jesse. In 1917, he coined that term, that word, social studies. He was actually a chairman of National Education Association Committee on Social Studies in the United States of America. Then, now, social studies thought the thoughts about social study, or let's say social studies thought, started developing in the United States of America in the early 1900s, that is 1900, as a reaction to the tremendous numerous human problems prevailing at that particular period. So I think USA was facing a whole lot of challenges then on this, on human relation and a lot of problems. Some of these problems, however, were basically social and political, but purely which Americans went through and were just getting over. Some of these problems were seen as cogs in the wheel of all effort at ensuring the evolution of realistic and modernized democratic state. Now, you see, when we are faced with challenges, sometimes most of this landmark development that you are seeing now, they came about as a result of deep challenges that humans face. And so when those challenges pose themselves, human in an attempt to look for solution may end up creating something that's a landmark event. Some solutions, some of the things we are practicing now and enjoying, now, they started as a problem. So some people look for a way to solve those problems and came up with standard solution, which we now celebrate. That is exactly what happened. They were having some issues, some humanistic issues, and some of those issues came about as a result of war. Those days now and war, they like war and war and war, bombing each other and the rest of them. Now, by 1921, a national association called National Council for Social Studies, CS, NCSS, National Council for Social Studies, that is in the United States of America. Uh, what did this body do on social studies? NCSS, whose membership is open to person or institution interested in social studies, was formed. In 1921, NCSS was formed, and NCSS stands for National Council for Social Studies. This council charged itself and its members with the responsibility of working towards a better understanding of social studies and its importance in developing responsible participation in social, political, and economic lives. Now, the NCSS, that is National Council for Social Studies, has since been playing prominent roles in the development and wider acceptance of social studies across the world. The organization has written several position statements on the basic rationale for social studies education and curriculum guidelines. Now, through the effort of the NCSS, now this is just going to be more of reading because it's history. What we are doing now is history, historical background of social studies, if you still remember the unit we are studying about. So we are just going to be reading more of history. You just need to digest some points from those history. Now, the efforts of NCSS.
Okay, I added that to the list.
Oh, sorry. Task forces were set up to review the scope, content, and sequences of social studies. This has really influenced the evolutionary development of social studies in American schools. Now, that means NCSS is playing a vital role in seeing the modernization, the effectiveness, and the efficiency of social studies in America and beyond. They came up with curriculum, essays and write-up standards that they've set for the practice of social studies across the world. Now, events in the world scene, such as Russia launching of Sputnik in 1957 and American internal social problems of the 1960s, gave birth to the new social studies in 1957, sorry, in the 1960s. That began in the 1960s. New social studies began in 1960. During this period, curriculum materials of these new social studies were designed to teach students both the concept and method of inquiry used by historians and social scientists for getting knowledge. Many teaching aids were developed and employed in the teaching of concepts and in the formulation of organizations to promote effective teaching of social studies. These are events that took place between 1957 and 1960. Russia launched Sputnik, and I think we would like to know what that Sputnik means. I would like to we would like to dive into that Sputnik. What does it stand for? Uh, it's okay. Let's read a bit about it. An external reading. Sputnik is like a traveling companion. That is, in fact, the literal meaning of that word, Sputnik, is traveling companion or a fellow traveler. That is, or just say a companion. Sputnik means companion in the real sense, and it became famous in 1957 when the former Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. It was the first world artificial satellite. And the reason why they named it Sputnik was because it intended to be the Earth traveling companion in orbit. You know what satellite does now? It orbits the Earth So the word Sputnik can be a companion or a fellow traveler. So when Russia launched Sputnik, which is a satellite, or which was a satellite then in 1957, which stands for, I have an icebreaker for you in the chat box there, and you haven't attempted it. I hope you are still here. So that is what the word Sputnik means. And then American also in 1960, came up with the new social studies, and where they started designing study aids, new curriculums, and designs for that new social studies. Now, by the seventh decade of the 20th century, that should be around 1970 something, the alarming rate of crimes, divorce, and illegal use of drugs on large scale heightened the interest of the Americans in social studies. Now, you see, like I've mentioned earlier, that problems and challenges is what brings about the inquisition into some solutions. And those solutions today have become a standard of operation. Now, at this time, you can see America faced a lot of things. Even to today, they are still facing it. They are still facing a whole lot of divorce issue, drugs, and the rest of them. Now, at this time, they had started seeing social studies as a catalyst of social change. There is a need for social change since people are, moving towards the direction of bad habits and behavior, and it's becoming heightened. So there is now a need to look for a solution. So they see social study as one effective means of, curbing all such acts in the nation. Hence, the discipline started focusing on relevance to social problems and so realization, social problems and self-realization. They now felt there was an urgent need for the school to prepare citizens to deal with some of the identified inevitable problems. Now, you can see the reason why Americans started moving towards the study of social studies. It is, however, important to note that in the United States of America, there is no national social study syllabus for all schools. Each school district writes its own social studies syllabus. This is very important. This is an important information. No national syllabus like as we have it in Nigeria. Each district, well, United States of America is very large, up to 150 states. So you can't imagine that all of them will agree. They will have different social problems they are facing in each district. So I think that's why each district decide to write its own syllabus. Now, social studies in American scene as observed by Obebi in 1990 does not have a static structure. That means it is dynamic, it's ever changing, it's dynamic, it is not static. It has transformed from citizenship education for national development by enlarging the vision and meaning of citizenship to include not only the local community, but the state and the nation, but also the global community. What we're trying to say is that when we talk about social studies in America, we're talking of something that is ever dynamic. History of social study, we will talk about the meaning of social study. There are some definitions given by the American societies, and you find that most of them first dealt with citizenship, citizenship education. That was one of it that dwelt on citizenship education, if you still remember. But social study has far, moved from that simple definition in the United States to more critical considerations. So it has become something of national interest, national development, even global development. Now, this is in recognition of the fact that all human beings live in a multi-boundary world, not simply a world of nation states, but one with a diversity of worldwide systems in which all people affect and are affected by others across the globe. It's actually going to be unreasonable for the whole world to have one single social study curriculum. It doesn't add up. In Nigeria alone, we have different cultures and different challenges that we are facing that America is not facing when it comes to human behavior. So that is the thing. So there is a need for every nation to have its own. You can't have a national or an international curriculum for social studies because social relations and behavior differs by people. Now, the recognition of the dynamic nature of social studies in the United States of America is also being influenced by the fact that humanity is increasingly threatened by problems that cannot be solved by actions taken only at the national level. Now, social studies in the United States, I just hope you will not get bored because what we are doing is history, and sometimes history is just always boring. Social studies in the United States of America today can therefore be said to be focusing on the reduction of pressures, social and environmental problems, which are of national and international concerns, with content usually drawn from a variety of discipline, interdisciplinary approach. Students are being taught to think globally as they act locally. Learners are taught in ways that make learning active, interactive, hands-on, and engaging. Now we are still on the history of social studies in the United States of America, the background, and I think we've learned a whole lot of things already. You've known quite a lot of things about the way this uh, concept evolved in America, and it's kind of a response to challenges they were having, social challenges they were having, and they seem to recognize that social study would be the most effective way to combat and overcome such problems. Now, the last part of the history of social study in America is it must be noted that any society which intends promoting democratic discipline through social studies education requires individuals who are willing and able to participate effectively in the solution of common problems. So they must also be willing at times to take decisions which demand compromise among different points of views. This is important for society to develop towards desired goals. And this is the idea of social studies in the United States of America. While it is true that other subjects also contribute towards the development of desirable goals in the youth, social studies is viewed as bearing the greater responsibility. This is because social studies deals directly with human problems and tries to shape the behaviors of individuals. In a nutshell, from these views and deliberations on the American society, we will be able to come up with a statement that social studies seems to be like the nation's uh, character former or builder in youth. To bring out the desirable behavior and standards in the citizens of a nation. So we can another important point we have drawn out from the idea of social study in America is that it is a dynamic process. It changes. It's not something that is static. It started from just teaching them about citizenship, awareness of their belonging to the nation, moving to now teaching them about social behavior and acceptable norms in the country. So that is, and then all of this happened in the 20th century. So that is 1900 to 2000, and a lot of things happened. Then you can see Obebi in 1990 was one that came up with some of those information as we've studied. Now, that's just a form of summary under the United States of America. And the next country we like to look at is social studies taught in Britain. But before we go into that, I want to see if you still have the time and the energy to continue with Britain. Let me ask you that if the time is still there, then we'll proceed. I don't want to be, yes, character molding. I don't want us to be comparting so many things together unnecessarily. Yes, are you still here? Can we still proceed with the Britain? All right, so Britain, development of social studies thoughts in Britain. How did they come about their own practice in social studies? There was very little evidence of the existence of social studies before the 1930s in Britain and other European countries. What could be regarded as social studies content at that time included materials from the economics and political science, which were then taught as civics, according to Ogundare in 2000. Okay, this view is in line with what and Dufour, Lawton and Dufour in 1914, which were quoted by Obebi in 1990 when he observed through a remark that there is little evidence of the existence of social studies in the curriculum at the beginning of the 20th century, although history and geography, which were fairly established in the elementary and grammar school by the 1920s, would sometimes include materials generally referred to as civics. We are trying to quote a place that seems to deal expressly with a kind of backup and evidence to the first statement we made that says before 1930 in Britain there was no reasonable practice of social study in view. Now, the range was extremely restricted with much of the learning being by rote. The range was extremely restricted with much of the learning mainly by rote. Mainly by rote. So I like us to check because what does mean that most of the learning are mainly by rote. It means doing something by memorizing. Like that thing you do teach your pupils in the morning that you say they should be reciting multiplication table 2. So every morning once they come, the first thing they will do before any other thing starts in the class is to recite multiplication table, maybe 2 to 10 or 2 to 15. You understand? That is what we call rote. They are the kind of memorization by repeated action. You keep repeating that thing because you want to memorize. It's not really because you want to understand it. Reading something repeatedly so in order to memorize it, not because you want to understand it. That is meaning of rote. So what they are trying to say is that the range was extremely restricted with much of the learning being by rote. So much of the things they do then in Britain in civic education then was just kind of memorizing. However, social studies taught itself was known to have had initial setbacks in the history of British educational system. Why? By 1926, there was a criticism of the content of the school curriculum through the Haddo report. The report pronounced that the general character of teaching should take account of the pupil's natural and social environment. This implies the desire for a curriculum that is socially relevant and capable of equipping the young ones to go out and become adults in an industrialized society. Now, that report did not stop there. The report also noticed some element of indoctrination in what was being taught in schools. For example, children were taught to honor the queen. They were also taught to run away from every policeman and so on and so forth. This therefore marked the beginning of a more dynamic and effective thought in the British educational system, which social studies exponents later capitalized on. That is a very, very funny knowledge. When you teach children to run from police, that means you are kind of create some kind of fear in them. You are stimulating fear in them of police officers. Now, the advent, what if their parents are police? The advent of Second World War, which heralded some war problems that later had adverse effect on the British citizenry, also heightened the chances of this dynamic thought. What I'm just trying to say is that most of these nations, they seem to be against social studies at the initial, but something challenges, maybe during the war time, the effect of the war, adverse effect of the war, after the war effect, made some of them to start having a rethink that social study could help them in solving some national problems. Because initially, most of them did not embrace the idea of social studies, but challenges and problems they face in, especially in human behavior and relation in their nation, seem to help them to adjust to accept the proposition of social study. Now, the World War II, the World War II raised the concern for constructing a better society from tested experiences of the war. The to resolve this post-war problem of adjustment being faced by the citizens, more interest was shown in social studies. So social studies, while the war was a negative thing, it was a positive point for social study to, materialize, to come into space. There's always two sides of everything, the positive and the negative side. While something is happening and it's hurting some people, it's actually it's to an advantage to some people. Now, this was because of the content of the school curriculum. This was because the content of the school curriculum was identified as capable of helping to construct a better society out of the catastrophe one for the emerging Britons. Those are people from Britain. Now, British educators, therefore, saw a liberal education as a way to bring about greater understanding of humankind. The thought of social studies for inclusion in the school curriculum became more prominent as it was recognized as capable of helping the pupils and adults become socially conscious and responsible members of their society. Hence, by 1944, the social studies curriculum emerged during the establishment of secondary education for all, when the school leaving age was raised from 14 to 15 years, and teachers had to be retrained, as pointed out by Lawton and Dufour in 1974. This is history. It's always interesting, but boring sometimes. So we're seeing what is happening. How did Britain embrace social study? What made them to have a rethink? They didn't like the idea before. All they had before was civic, which was just dealing with political science, you know. But here they are embracing social studies. Why? They had challenges, especially during the war and after the war. A lot of emotional damages and challenges, were making people to misbehave. So they saw the need for something that will help them to adjust socially, and that was why social study was able to come into space. Now let's read more. Between 1945 and early 1950s, there was therefore a tremendous growth in the thought of social studies. Why? Ambitious schemes were developed on integrated approach to the subject. This growing thought were reflected in the series of teachers' handbooks that were produced in social studies. For instance, by 1945, the movement produced a document in which social studies was going to be taught as a common core course for the younger ones. It's no longer elective, it's now a core course for the younger ones. That is an improvement. They are now embracing it better and better towards the 1940s and 1950s. Now, the social studies program that emerged during this period, however, faced a lot of resentment from subject specialists like the historians and geographers, who saw nothing special in the growing thoughts of the subject. They felt insecure because of continuous spread of the subject. They don't want social study to come and take over their own history, the subject they are good in teaching. They don't want it to take over geography. Now, when something glorious is about to, take place, it's actually going to have a lot of challenges, oppositions, and so many resentment from opponent. So it seems what I'm just trying to say here is that social studies now have to compete with geography and history. Now, the resentment did not allow the teaching of the subject to further develop, especially between the late 1950s and 1960s. But by the early 1960s, there was a revival of interest in social studies as a result of recommendations of the Crowder Report of 1959 and the Newton Report of 1963. Now, the two demanded that school curricula should be relevant to to industrialized and changing society. The two demanded, when we say the two, we're talking about the Crowder Report and the Newton Report. They demanded that school curricula should be relevant to industrialized and changing society. There was therefore the thought that there was therefore that thought which wanted social studies to focus on how to equip the youth to become well-trained adults in an industrialized society. Since then, social studies has received more attention in the British school curriculum. By 1968, an important year for social studies, key books and curriculum projects on the subject emerged in Britain. Now, we are talking about the development of this subject in different countries. You can see that the experience in Britain was different from the one in America. Now, the dynamic growth of the British society and advancement in technology have all combined to improve the thought of social studies in Britain to the extent that the focus of the discipline has shifted and the subject is now seen as modern studies with its content including living in the community, living with others, and then urban life and learning. I think this will give it more credit. This will give it more credit. Now, from the foregoing, one could say that the general objectives of British may be seen as developing in children a more critical and balanced social awareness. The new social studies in Britain emphasizes insight, concept from the social science. You can see that different countries with different experiences. As a matter of fact, not only did social study emerge in Britain, but the time of its emergence, it's experienced some criticism from historians and geographers. But thank God it overcame its challenges. So that is the history in Britain, the development in Britain. At least one thing that is funny enough to remember is that initially, when they were teaching in Britain, they have this their teaching that seems to tell children to honor the queen. Well, that's very very normal. But the second funny one is that they were taught to run away from police. Well, there were so it started little by little like that, and then more development and now shifted to shaping the human behavior, relation, and community life, living with others, and urban life and learning. And that's become the standard they use even to date. Now, the new social study in Britain deals with concept and generalization, which came from social science. Our next concern is now our own very continent, Africa. Development of social studies taught in Africa. Well, we are going to see the uniqueness in ours, or if we actually bought from Britain and America and combine them together, or we are just imitating them. We will see when we read the development of social studies taught in Africa. I think we have to stop here now as it is time to stop. No, we have done two things today. Development of the subject, social study in America, United States of America, and in Britain. We have two more in Africa and narrowing down to Nigeria. So those are the two we'll talk about in the next class. For now, we have done justice and it's a wonderful class. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. Like I promised, I will upload the practice questions tomorrow. Have a wonderful night. I think we'll still meet tonight for GST 102. Bye for now.